Ladies and gentlemen, shore leave is over. Welcome back to Discovery Debrief, a podcast that dives headfirst into the proverbial deep end of our favorite spacefaring franchise on the road to Season 2 of its latest entry, Star Trek Discovery. I'm co-host Chris Clow, and I'm joined as usual by members of our bold panel of Star Trek franchise explorers, including Rachael Clow.
Hello.
Zaki Hasan.
Hi.
And Cicero Holmes.
I'm a hormonal space rabbit.
That we will talk about that soon. Next episode, but soon. So, obviously we've been gone a while, and rather than bore you with the details of why that's the case, let me just basically boil it down to a state of general busyness on the part of every member of this panel. Obviously, a ton of news has transpired over the last couple of months, but we also have an important discussion to have, as well as the first Short Treks episode to react to the next time you hear from us. So this episode will primarily continue our look at our panel's choices for all-time favorite Star Trek episodes, and this week's selection comes from none other than our film critic and college professor extraordinaire, Mr. Zaki Hasan. His choice is The Visitor, the third episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine's fourth season, which takes an emotional deep dive into the relationship between Benjamin Sisko and his son Jake. But first, as always, how have you guys been doing? And in the last couple of months, has there been any other Star Trek engagement, or have you kind of just been poking your head up when the news seems to be breaking once in a while? Cicero, kick us off.
Yeah, so I've been doing more of the former than the latter, or actually I've been doing more of the latter than the former. Yeah, look at that, because I don't know how those words work all of a sudden. Yes, I've been mostly poking my head up. I know that I really wanted to continue my reverse rewatch of the Star Trek television shows with DS9. I have not actually started that in earnest yet, and I really want to. But other than that, just paying attention to news.
Absolutely. And I know that Spawn on Me has been keeping you busy amongst, various tabletop games, including one that's Star Trek related. For those of you that follow the DSC Debrief Twitter handle, definitely check that out. Zaki, last couple of months, I know it's probably gotten even busier for you recently within the last month, but give us an idea what you've been up to.
Well, yeah, like you said, it's been busy just with the summer classes give way to fall classes, so not a lot of rest for the wicked. But as far as how I've been engaging with Trek, I've been rereading the old DC Comics series based on the original series from the 80s, the original volume that they did set immediately after Star Trek II. And that's been a lot of fun, just a deep dive into a time when you could have licensed Star Trek fiction that was just kind of bonkers and out there and didn't give a crap about continuity. And I kind of love it. I kind of love that existed, and I don't think we'll ever get Star Trek like that again. Probably not.
Now, what format have you been reading those in?
I have the entire series bound in custom books.
Oh, okay. So you did like you did with Superman. You got the Star Trek books bound as well. Okay,
yeah, I've got bound volumes of basically every Star Trek comic from the Marvel run after the motion picture through like the Malibu Deep Space Nine series, every single. Wow. And most of the Marvel, like when they did it in the late 90s, they had their own. It was like Paramount Comics from Marvel, so I have most of those bound
in print. Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, it lasted for like 2.5 years, maybe.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I haven't really done very much absorption of those stories. I remember though, especially when I was working at a comic shop and I was always organizing back issues, I always took a second to take a look at what we had of those, which wasn't much. But I remember being kind of amazed by the artwork, especially on the covers of those books. Those always seemed really great.
So especially because the DC did 2 volumes of classic Star Trek, and the second volume, which started after Star Trek V, almost every cover was by Jerome K. Moore, and it is every single issue is like you could hang it on your wall. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah,
sounds terrific. Rachael, Star Trek engagement over the last couple of months. What have you been doing?
I've been watching the 3rd season of TNG.
Yeah.
And maybe 2nd season if we're going back that far.
Right, yeah. It's been
but yeah, early TNG. I don't know. It's starting to get good now. Although, I like all we were watching this YouTube video that was like, oh, these are the worst episodes of TNG, and like every other one, I was like, I like it.
Yeah,
I'm with you. Even the bonkers ones I like.
Yeah,
I was surprised
many of them.
That, and Zaki, you'll have to speak to this too, but I was surprised, Rachel, you expressed even a little bit of affection for Shades of Grey.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it in a long time because I would always just skip it.
Yeah.
And I just watched it and I was like, yeah, this isn't that bad.
I mean, as far as clip shows go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I really hate clip shows, Chris.
It's not a Friends clip show, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a decent amount. Like, they film like a quarter to a third of an episode.
Yeah.
If nothing else, Shades of Grey, it benefited the franchise because after Shades of Grey, there was never another Shades of Grey.
That's true.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Right.
So it did that for the franchise.
Quite a drop in quality, though, considering Trek's lineage with clip shows, because as far as I know, there have only been 3 episodes total, and 2 of them were the Menagerie. And I actually really love watching the Menagerie, even though
that's great.
It's just the cage reassembled with a
the beauty of the Menagerie is that it wasn't truly a clip show in the sense that it was something that people had not seen before. So
true. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I guess, in modern context, my reaction to it is similar. But yeah, at the time, hey, if you haven't seen it, it's new to
you have to give them credit. They were like Native American tribes. They made use of every part of the carcass. They were like, we got this. We gotta figure out. We spent the money already.
Excellent. Well, we do have a couple of brief pieces of news items before we move on to our episode discussion. So as usual, why don't we talk about those first? So rather than go into pretty exhaustive detail about every single thing that has happened since August on the front of Star Trek, which is actually quite a lot, mostly in TV related stuff. Like, I actually had a news item written up about the whole drama that's going on with CBS right now, especially with Les Moonves stepping down, but I decided to table it because I realized how generally irrelevant it was until there might be some movement with the new CBS Paramount merger. But with Moonves out of the way, it's looking a little more likely. But anyway, the biggest news to come out over the last couple of months all revolve around getting deeper looks at Star Trek Discovery Season 2, including the casting of actor Ethan Peck as Spock, as well as a new Season 2 trailer that premiered at the New York Comic Con that gave us deeper looks at the story, at actress Rebecca Romaine as a number 1 from the original TOS pilot, as well as our first glimpse of Peck as Spock himself. And we also got a slight amount of voice work from it too. Guys, lay it on me. With all these new things on deck, how do you think Season 2 is shaping up before it's now confirmed January 17th, 2019 premiere date? Zaki?
I'm excited.
Mm-hmm.
It looks good. I think it feels like I don't know. It feels very tonally different from what we got in the first season, and I kind of like that. And I don't know if this is their plan moving forward, but it feels like every season it's almost like an anthology show within like an ongoing show where like season 2 of Discovery is just doing something completely different. No, and here's Pike, and we know Pike is probably. He's not captain of the Discovery from now until, the end of the series. So, we'll get him for a few episodes and that'll be fun. And it'll be like the little Spock thing. And then we'll move on. There'll be something else. I kind of like that. And as you guys know, I was not a fan of our extended sojourn into the Mirror universe. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, hey, here's something different. I can dig it. Yeah. And this Ethan Peck guy, he looks great.
Yeah, he does.
He does. I have to say this is an amusing conversation I had with my wife. Well, I find it amusing anyway. We were watching the trailer, and she's like only sideways aware of Star Trek purely. She tolerates it because of me. And she's like, "Oh, is that Spock?" I was like, "Yeah, it's the new Spock." I was like, the guy, he's Gregory Peck's grandson. And my wife says, "In real life?" And I said, no, on the show, he's Spock. Like, of all the reactions, that was the
Oh, that's hilarious. Nice troll. Troll game 9000. I like that. Well, good. Yeah, I'm glad you're excited because I know I am. 1 month after my birthday is when it drops. So
nice.
Rachel, season 2 with the new trailer, with everything that we've seen.
Yeah, my feelings haven't changed. I was excited about it before, and I'm excited about it now.
But now that you've gotten a little bit more of a glimpse at things,
equal levels of excitement.
So it didn't. That trailer didn't move the needle for you at all.
No, but I was already pretty hype, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't as hype as I can get.
So it couldn't push it any further. Then is what you're saying.
Well, I don't know. I guess not.
Okay.
Rachel has a very Vulcan response.
Yeah, no kidding.
There's one eyebrow slightly raised. And she says,
yeah. It's like, ooh. I do like Ethan Peck though. He looks good. He looks very much like an intermediate between Baby Spock from 2009 and grown up Spock.
Yeah.
Quinto.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that. And it makes sense, I suppose, considering where we are in the timeline. But Cicero, how has the needle moved at all for you, or what did you get any new impressions from this new trailer?
It's been a few months since I've been able to do this, so I will start by saying #Rachel was right. I feel similarly to Rachel. I was already excited. Nothing that's come out has made me more excited about season 2 because my excitement level was already at its peak.
Sure.
I will say that I think that it's interesting how I went through the 5 stages of grief in a nanosecond when I heard that Spock was cast.
Okay.
And then it wasn't Zach Quinto. So it was just like, oh no, they're not gonna do it. And then I'm like, all right, well, let me see the guy. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, and he's Gregory Peck's grandson
in real life.
Yeah. Well, and on the show, why not? His great
Amanda Grace's great grandfather, was Gregory Peck.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a fair amount of news. I've enjoyed all of it. It's I'm just as eager to see what season 2 is. What I will say really quickly is that I don't necessarily agree with the hypothesis that Zaki kind of tossed out about it potentially almost being like an anthology series, although that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we'll get from season 2 will be more in line with what we can expect going forward from Discovery, unless it bombs, which means it'll go back to season 1. It'll go back to this, and I'm speaking about the tones of a show, of a second season that I haven't seen. I've seen
right.
8 seconds of, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that one of the things that the showrunners said before, or in their kind of TSAs and or was it the TCAs and at the cons, is that season 2 tonally will be more recognizable to hardcore, quote unquote, hardcore classic Trek fans.
Right.
Interesting.
So, and I think that's what we'll get going.
Well, and it's funny that you bring that up, because in preparation for this episode, I took a listen back to what we had spoken about together after we had watched the season finale. And Cicero, you specifically asked me if I would be okay with another actor taking up the role of Spock. And I said, yes, but Quinto is far and away the preference. But, and, now that I think about it, upon further reflection, it probably makes more sense for this show in general to go just totally different directions in casting. And we probably should have seen that with the casting of James Frain as CIRROC. Like, if they were going to make a concerted effort to try and keep those performers unified, they probably would have cast Ben Cross as CIRROC. But it, and then
definitely when definitely once Anson Mount came in,
Yeah.
I was ready. Like I had mentally prepared myself. I was like, this isn't going to have Quinto in it.
Yeah. And,
Right.
but, and then like the night that Peck was announced, I found an interview with him from some ABC morning show from a couple of years ago. And the thing that immediately impressed, obviously he's a beautiful man. I mean, he's been a model. So that stuff is all good. But his voice has such a quality to it that just seems perfect for Spock. I mean, it's certainly deeper than Nimoy's, but it also has sort of this tempered quality to it, even just as he's speaking. And he definitely carried that forward in the line from him that we heard in the trailer. So I'm pretty excited. I'm very glad that they're going forward, and it looks like, as Zaki alluded to also in that season finale conversation, they're bear hugging the continuity. It's going to explicitly address why we never heard Michael Burnham's name for the rest of Spock's life. And it's going to be kind of an interesting bit of creative wizardry to see what kind of excuse they come up with. I hope it's not out of resentment. That would be...
Yeah, but it's going to be, though.
You think it's going to be resentment?
Yeah.
Or
like some sort of horrible guilt. It's not going to be good, Chris.
See, I don't know, because I feel like if they do that, then it puts the audience against Burnham. Like it stacks the deck, because if there's, you know what I mean? Because we're just we're predisposed to be sympathetic to Spock just because he's effing Spock, right?
Yeah,
and so
right.
Sure.
The idea that, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I guess we just have to wait and find out.
Yeah, I mean, part of me thinks that they're not going to do it just because it would be so easy to make it rooted in resentment. But they've taken some turns that were on the easy path before, specifically with the season finale. I still don't think that that's a great episode of season 1 of Discovery, even though it got to places that I wanted to see. But we'll just have to tell, or time will tell.
The other thing is we've already done the resentful sibling thing with Cybok.
Yeah, and that's not something they want to call back to. At least I hope not. But hey.
Oh, maybe, you know what? Maybe they could do the Cybok story in the way that it was meant to be told.
That would be
maybe
kind of cool.
I mean, there's room for Cybok. I wouldn't be against a Cybok appearance, but taking creative cues from Star Trek V, that would not be my first recommendation. But let's move along. We got one more little news item, just a little one. Work has begun on the upcoming Jean-Luc Picard-centric CBS All-Access series, with Patrick Stewart himself tweeting an image out of him in the writer's room. His involvement seems to be pretty immense, and we know that the upcoming show will take place roughly 20 years after the events of Star Trek Nemesis, so right on the cusp of the 25th century. And a recent Trek movie report also clarifies that from the production side, it's viewed not as a limited series like all of us thought it was going to be, but as an ongoing project that's envisioned to have multiple seasons. So, guys, after having the summer to mull over how this show could be shaping up, what do you think now that you've had more time to sit with it? And what do you think of the prospect of Picard on a potentially indefinite basis? Cicero.
I hope that we get a BBC-style 6-episode season. I would be okay with that. I would absolutely love that. That if we could get, our 75-minute 6 75-minute episodes, I think that would be fantastic. Any more than that, then I hate to talk about it, but Sir Patrick Stewart is getting up in age. The rigors of television is something that I worry about for people that are of age, and if he's got to lead the show as opposed to just being a character on the show, that's a lot of time invested. and I just don't want to have to put him through that kind of stuff. So 6 episodes, knock it out.
It's a very caring perspective, but it's interesting. I honestly didn't expect that. Zaki?
I think to Cicero's point, the one advantage of this character and one presumes the premise they've come up with is that I'm assuming he's not going to be, hanging from, scaffolding and battling board queens. I think it'll be a lot of like sitting in the chair and talking and stuff. So I would assume that it'll play to what he's capable of right now. The other thing is, he looks great for his age. My gosh, he's pushing 80, and so that's nice. Ultimately what it comes down to for me is, and I may have said this previously, I can't remember, but they clearly came up with a premise that convinced him it was worth bringing Captain Picard out of the cobwebs, and I think more than anything, that's like, I'm kind of like, obviously we're all just excited, hey man, Captain Picard's coming back, but I'm also like, what is the thing that got Patrick Stewart excited to bring Captain Picard back? That's what I'm so curious for, because he could have done this any time. It's not like he needed to do it.
Yeah, that's true. The timing is definitely a factor, I'm sure. Rachel, ongoing Captain Picard or Ambassador Jean-Luc Picard?
I wanted just to be contrarian, be the opposite of Cicero, and be like, work him till he's dead.
He owes us.
He owes us, yeah. I don't, what's the difference between an ongoing and a limited series, like, really?
Right.
It seems like one can, like, convert into the other in the age of streaming at the whims of the producers.
And so I think the only difference is contractually.
I see.
Right?
Well, it also depends on how many episodes per season, because we have no idea if maybe it's going to be 6 single-hour episodes that make up a season of this show.
Right.
Or maybe it'll be Discovery sized. The only thing that I know as far as that stuff is concerned is that CBS, after they saw the success of Discovery, thank God it was successful, CBS is now apparently fully committed to always having something Star Trek in the mix to have on All-Access. So really, if that's their strategy, then Picard might just be the beginning. That there's potentially a 3rd series out there that we don't know about that could always be running when one of the other shows is off. Now, Picard's not going to be a permanent solution to that. It can't be, just by virtue of Patrick Stewart's age. I'm sure that he's not going to want to do it forever again.
I'm sure he's really happy to hear us cavalierly talk about his mortality like this.
But it is something we have to consider, though. It's not. But again, he's in great shape. He looks very, very good. He's still a damn handsome man. If he thinks he can do it for the rigors of a TV schedule, then more power to him. It's just not as likely. That's all I'm trying to say. So I'm really interested to see how they're more interested in expanding Star Trek on All-Access. I kind of hope that they keep things in the late 24th, early 25th century to keep pushing things forward. We have Discovery in the 23rd. Really, continuing Adventures of Enterprise, I hope, is somewhere in the back of someone's mind at CBS. Or at least doing something with those characters to give them a send-off. I would love to see something like that. Of course, it's all speculation on my part. But
you know what I would love? I would absolutely love an animated series.
It's working well for Star Wars.
Right. Just an animated Star Trek series. I don't know what, I don't know where it's set. I don't know if it's, maybe it's a TNG animated series.
Mm-hmm. Sort of the
where
space
all,
between...
right.
Yeah.
And they wind up with, you can bring the entire crew back and just do voice acting.
Mm-hmm. I'd be into it.
Yeah.
Stop giving them free ideas.
Oh yeah.
I don't have any ideas. If you want ideas, you gotta pay me.
Well,
If you're good at something, never do it for free.
Yes.
Right.
Chris.
Sorry. Sorry. I'm not taking mine or the Joker's own advice. All right. Well, yeah. So I think pretty safe to say then that we're all pretty excited about what the future could hold for Star Trek. But we do have a classic to talk about here today. So let's move along to our discussion for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 4, Episode 3, The Visitor. So if you've listened to our previous episodes in this sub-series, you know that each panelist will take the lead in the respective discussion for their episode choice since they chose this topic. It also allows us to engage with the episode's material in the way that they find most important. So the basic premise of The Visitor is that a young fan of elderly writer Jake Sisko turns up at his door and he recounts to her the story of losing his father in a temporal displacement accident aboard the Defiant. What follows is likely the single most emotional episode that Deep Space Nine ever produced, anchored by series-defining performances from Avery Brooks, from CIRROC LOFTON, and guest star TONY TODD as the older Jake Sisko. If you're listening to this show, you probably know all of that, just to get out of the way. So, having said all of that, this episode was chosen by Zaki Hasan. So, Zaki, take us away.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris. By the way, I always say you're the captain of our ship, and I appreciate that you helped sort of formulate the thoughts that I was having without even realizing what I was thinking. You helped me really formalize the discussion. So, thank you, Captain.
My pleasure, sir.
So you mentioned at the top that this is the third episode of season 4. It was the third film, but it was the second aired of the 4th season. I only mentioned that because. Not because I'm like, but I mention it because to me, my interfacing with this episode, part of it was its juxtaposition with having aired just after Way of the Warrior, which was as far as series defining episodes go, that was pretty important because, it brought Worf onto the show. Mm-hmm. It completely demolished the Klingon dynamic. I mean, it was a feature length episode. It was big. And so the Visitor coming next, what made it stand out even more was how confident it was, because it is by no means a traditional Deep Space Nine episode. And when I think of my emotional connection with this, I think of that. But to all of you, it is one of the more raw emotional episodes in the franchise. And if you can remember back to before you saw this episode and comparing it to each of your perceptions after you had the chance to see it, did it change any of your pre-existing notions about Ben Sisko, about Jake, but their relationship, both of them? Cicero, why don't you start?
I always looked at Ben Sisko, or Avery Brooks, as an actor, capital A actor. So when, whatever it is that he needs to pull from a character, draw from, in order to make the scene come to life or make something happen, he's able to do it. And I think throughout DS9, and one of the reasons that Sisko is my favorite commander is because Avery Brooks embodies that guy in a way like he's an actor's actor. And he was in full force in this episode. But what was so interesting to me was that the episode for me was less about Jake Sisko and Ben Sisko and this visitor. It was about me and my sons and my father. And I just replaced those actors with me and my family. And I just lived within the episode. And it was amazing. So wow. It was really deep for me.
Wow. Rachel?
Well, I think the first time I saw this, I can remember just being kind of like, why don't you just get over it, dude? Like,
Jeez. My God.
but,
My wife, ladies and gentlemen.
well,
She is a Vulcan.
Very Ayn Rand point of view.
get over it. Well, I remember being like, well, like,
Your dad died when?
no, like, I mean, watching it as an older person, like, not as, like, I don't know, I was like 20.
There's a picture of Rachel watching this episode curling on a workbench, curling her biceps.
Yeah. Get over it, bro. But yeah, so I mean, watching it again later, I was sort of struck by I mean, how terrible would it be if you couldn't really get past the death of a loved one or like move on with your life because they were still kind of around and like there's something you could or should do to bring them back. And so like I definitely understood it better with a little bit more life experience. I mean, like like how do you get, how do you move on with your life after you lose a loved one, and how terrible it would be to have that disrupted by the fact that they're not really gone. But then also how wonderful if your loved ones who had left you were able to see where you were in your life and give you advice even for just a few minutes. So I think it's a really nice meditation on those ideas of loss and what it would be like to be able to talk to people you've lost.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, what do you think?
Well, see, this one struck me at a pretty interesting time in my life in general, just because I didn't actually watch Deep Space Nine for the first time all the way through until about 2011. So I came to it very, very late.
Wow.
And because I mean, I was one of those stupid people that when it's on the space station, where's the track and the stars? all that crap. And so when I actually took the time to give Deep Space Nine a try, because it was kind of like what Cicero recently did with Voyager. So this was a blind spot. I needed to fill that blind spot. And the year before, I had actually lost my father. So when I got to The Visitor, it was perhaps more emotional, or it was about as emotional as it possibly could be for me to watch it at the point that I watched it in. Because, it is that question, like, would you really be able to get over a loss if they were still kind of there? But also at the same time, just the core aspect of losing of a young man losing his father, as Jake even said at the very beginning of the episode. It's debilitating. I still haven't really gotten over it. I don't think I ever will. Right. So I intimately understood almost from the jump his obsession even before he realized exactly what was going on. So I mean, it's not the kind of perception for this episode I would wish upon anyone, but as to the original intent of the question, did it change my notions about the Siskos? It put, even though I always saw Benjamin Sisko as a really important mentor figure in the series at large, it put that in such a relatable context, especially to an experience that I had recently gone through, that it made me look at Benjamin Sisko far more like a father figure. Like if The Visitor hadn't happened until after, let's say, season 6, when Sisko tricked the Romulans into joining the war, then I would have far more of a perception of Sisko as a conniver, right?
Interesting.
But this episode really puts into perspective how important the familial unit is. And, it's taken even further, especially when you think about the episodes with Picard being tortured by the Cardassians and how the gull is talking to the child saying humans don't like their children as much as we do. And then the stuff that you saw with Ducat, where he's talking about all of his children and the love that he has for his family. Family is at the core of every major beating heart of a Star Trek character in one respect or another. And the Sisko's sense of family really struck a chord with me. So it made them infinitely more relatable, I guess, is what happened to me in the end.
Right.
So, Chris, I have a question. So by the time you watch, 2011, you're going through it. By then, you had to have some idea that The Visitor was already very highly thought of.
Mm-hmm.
So did you go in with that in mind? Like, oh, this is like one of the great episodes.
I was cognizant of that, but not to the degree that I probably should have been. Just because what I tried to do, for instance, when I started the show, I knew that Jadzia was going to die. And so I wanted to try and close myself off from as much information about it as I could in order to keep it genuinely refreshing. Because throughout that entire watch through, I was counting down. I knew exactly when Jadzia was going to die, and it was sort of like this focal point in the show for me, even though it didn't come until the end of season 6. But I always knew it was there. So I consciously closed myself off, even, as a kid, and I was talking to Rachel about this the other day. I obsessively read the Star Trek encyclopedia to the point where the bounding fell out when I was a kid. And that's how much I loved Star Trek, but I kind of just tried to isolate myself and just watch it. And it really did make The Visitor strike even more of a chord with me. But it might not have mattered, because having gone through the loss of my father, I think sharpened the blade for it to stab into my chest even more.
Wow.
I wasn't aware that it was, one of the great episodes when I watched it, but actually, sort of the presence of Tony Todd kind of, like, I was like, oh, I know that actor.
Right.
Like, this must be like, I don't know, for some reason, like, I don't know why I thought this, but I was like, oh, he's like an actor.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, this is going to be like a serious episode.
Right. Well, and Tony Todd, he does such a good job just being Jake.
Yes.
He does a good job of taking what CIRROC LOFTON was doing on the show and just kind of, obviously the writing is a big part of it too, but he seemed to extrapolate from the performance really well into something that was totally truthful and great. And I've never seen Candyman, but
oh wow,
it's a very good movie.
Is it? All right.
Yeah, it is actually.
All right. Well, we'll put it on the list. Hey, it's October.
It's set in Chicago.
That's terrifying. But for my money, this is the best thing I've ever seen from him.
Yeah. You know what's funny, and it really, man, I don't know. I guess I was in it in the moment, and like I was saying, that that what happened for me was that I wound up replacing my relationships with both my father and my son with Jake and Ben. And so I really was kind of just immersed within this character, and this portrayal, because my father and I haven't seen each other in I haven't seen him since I moved to Chicago, and I moved to Chicago 13 years ago.
Wow.
Oh wow.
So yeah. And I've had issues with my own son, where we're basically, we were estranged, and one of the things that we've done since we've been gone is I've reconnected with my son. But just during understanding from both sides of that, being a son of a father who is gone, but I know he's not. But to me, he might as well be.
Wow.
But still holding on to knowing that there is a chance that you can reconnect, and then being the father of a son who is gone to you, and what he's going through. So from from a very real perspective, I was able to understand that from these characters and from this story, and it really it really affected me.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, Cicero, just picking up on what you're saying, obviously, I think your reaction is normal, where you can't help but sort of imprint yourself or aspects of yourself onto a story like this. And definitely at the time it came out, I mean, this is whenever it aired, mid 90s.
Right.
I was a teenager, so I was in Jake's position. And then now with children of my own, I'm in Ben's position,
Right.
and I can't help, when I look at the totality of Ben Sisko as a character, one thought I had as I was just sitting here talking with you guys is, I have a good relationship with my dad. We get along very well, but my dad was never physically affectionate with me. It's just, that's not sort of his personality. It's not something I expected of him either, but something that I do with my kids all the time is I'll just grab him by the shoulder, I'll pull him close, and I kiss him on top of the head.
Right.
And I do that because Benjamin Sisko did that to Jake.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's part of my language as a parent, because I saw Captain Sisko modeling that. And I was that thought actually just occurred to me now as I'm sitting here talking to you. So we talk about how our lives are shaped by the fictions that we take in. I mean, here's a perfect example,
Right.
Right. Well, it's just amazing how those things, I mean, yeah, because Zaki, and I'm sure that Jonathan Kent is in there too somewhere. And
yeah. And I had the opportunity to tell John Schneider that when I met him.
Cool.
I was like, my concept of what a father should be, part of that is based on what I saw John Schneider embody as Jonathan Kent on Smallville.
Beautiful.
So moving on. So starting with The Next Generation, the theme of family is something you mentioned earlier, Chris. The theme of family became more pronounced in the franchise, but The Visitor takes that significantly further than almost every episode that dealt with it, both before and afterwards. What do you think it might be about a sci-fi series like Star Trek that lends itself so well to exploring familial issues? And would you say that The Visitor fits in a classically Star Trek mold? Did it break that mold? Chris, why don't you start with that?
Well, I think what we were all talking about just a second ago is sort of emblematic of why those issues work so well in its context, because at its best, Star Trek is almost like a universal language, right? And it's even universally relevant, particularly in its own time, but hopefully, decades afterward too. And with this, everybody has a strong impression of family, whether it's positive or negative, but family itself is sort of a universal constant that everybody can understand to one degree or another, whether we aspire to have a better one or whether we appreciate the one that we have, or just get mad every single time one of our parents calls us on the phone. I mean, it could be a whole host of different emotions that you feel, but I think that Star Trek lends itself so well to exploring family because the best Star Trek always understands the kinds of things that make the human condition so universal. And so in that respect, does it fit in a mold? Technically, yeah, but I also think it kind of broke it too, because it expanded it even further. I think the most emotional family episode before this one was probably right after Picard recovered from his assimilation and went to visit his family. It's a totally different dynamic than what we see from the Siskos. But that also,
although Chris, when you think about it, the B plot of that episode is about a son dealing with the loss of his father.
Yes, yes.
So there is some connective tissue there.
Absolutely, and also too, I think that it's a matter of it fits into a kind of universal mold, but it also does break it because how deep it cuts. So with episodes like Home and with episodes like The Visitor, it's varying degrees of getting into the minds of people with very different family situations. So yes, that B plot was connective, but if you look at the Picards and you compare them to the Crushers and you compare them to the Siskos, you're going to get a wide swath of people that, think about what their own situations are like, and they're going to relate to one of them, and they're going to have some kind of strong emotional connection to a conception of a family that might not be close to their own. So that's, I think, why it succeeds. As far as why science fiction can explore it, The Visitor kind of proves it. It takes an impossible situation of quasi grief that's not quite possible to move away from, but keeps it in the orbit of the characters. And I'm not sure if there's anything other than sort of like a science fiction kind of perspective that can make it so potent as we saw in an episode like this one.
And what's crazy is Christopher Nolan basically did a big budget version of The Visitor with Interstellar.
Yeah, he did.
Because he hits a lot of those same touchstones, the same idea of a child having to be without a parent and what that makes them like, and the grief that the parent feels for not being there for those milestones. I mean, it's almost like we're getting the stories from like two different perspectives. The Interstellar is like if we followed from Sisko's point of view,
Yeah.
Right.
But it's doing the same thing, and I just to piggyback off what you were saying, Chris, I mean, I think the science fiction element of being able to attempt to get closure for this for a wound that remains raw, right? Because I said this way earlier when we were setting up this episode, right? The one of the great fears any parent has is, what if something happens to me before they're ready, right?
Yeah.
And what that can do to a kid, and so that's what this episode allows for. It's Jake says it at the very end, right? We're getting a second chance, and you can have that wrapped up in a little science fiction bow, because that's not something often that life allows us,
Absolutely.
Rachel, what are your thoughts?
So I think it fits the Star Trek mold pretty well. I mean, I was telling Chris right after we rewatched it that this was sort of like a Deep Space Nine Inner Light, because it happened only in Sisko's mind. Like,
that's true.
So I think it's there's something very Star Trek-y about it, and that it only happened to one of the characters, or having these little bottle episodes that never really happen because they get erased. And I'm fine with that. I know some people don't really like it. Like, they don't like when, the things that happen never really happened, but I have no issues with it. With regards to Star Trek being a good place to explore family issues, I think it's just that, Star Trek is a good sort of framework or structure for exploring any topics that the writers are able to construct a good story around. I mean, you can tell any kind of story in a Star Trek vein, and stories about family are like one of the fundamental stories that humans tell. So that's why it works out really well. But for some reason they can't tell romances very good. I'm gonna chalk that up to the individual writers, not the fact that you just can't write a good romance for Star Trek.
Blue skies, smile at me.
What?
Nothing, never mind.
Cicero, your thoughts?
So I think it's when you said the question, I think one of the things that really came to my head was the fact that the TOS really was a warship, whereas TNG, they had they were explorers, and they were an exploratory ship, and there were families on board. So the idea that Star Trek was about family, I think, really was cemented and blossomed and bloomed within TNG. And I think that DS9 is the next series embrace that more so than any of the series after that. We talk about family, but there weren't necessarily families on board the other vessels to a larger degree once we got out of DS9. You can tell stories, like Rachel said, you can tell the stories of about families because it is such a quintessential unifier for humans. But this this episode, I think, worked well because it was a great episode. It was well thought out, it was well written, and the performances were phenomenal across the board. And and it was a story about family, and it was a story about things once you get to a certain age. And I think when I saw it, I wasn't a father, and it was just an episode, but now that I have been and have lived and experienced myriad things throughout my life, I was able to empathize with the thought process to create a story such as this. That worked well.
Yeah, no, I think what you say is really profound because in a broader sense, when you really think about it, this is an episode rather about eternal love,
right?
And the notion of eternal love is not something that's alien to science fiction stories, no pun intended, but the idea of that love being not a romantic love, but the love of a parent and a child. Right. And I think that's different, that's unique. Yeah. And to deal with it so openly and honestly, and I think there's something also to be said about the fact that and when I think of this episode, obviously the whole run of it always gets to me, but it's the closing seconds when Sisko has sort of reset the timeline, and we know he still has a memory of everything he went through because Jake's like, "Are you okay, Dad?" And he says, "I am now." Yeah. And you hear his voice just crack just slightly,
right.
And I think when we look at Avery Brooks's choices throughout the episode as an actor, actually him and Tony Todd both, right. they play with such open, honest emotion. It puts to the lie the notion of quote unquote masculinity. Yeah. You have to be stoic, and you can, right. It's and I think especially to have that from a person of color, I think that's so important.
Right.
Because and this is something Avery Brooks was uniquely cognizant of. He was like a walking, talking statement, whether he liked it or not.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of what he did as Sisko was to say, I want this character to be an example for people. And I think, I remember the earliest interviews. One thing I remember about Avery Brooks is whenever he gave an interview talking about the character, he always described him as a brown person. Mm-hmm. He didn't say Sisko's black. He said brown. And the reason that always stuck with me is I felt like he was including me in that as well, as a brown person. I always use that. I use that phraseology because I heard Avery Brooks say it. Mm-hmm. And so he defined what it means to be a man who is a person of color. What does that entail? What is a father who is a person of color? And so much of that shaped the character's arc for those 7 seasons, and it's boiled down to its essence in this episode.
Yes,
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, man, you were speaking. I felt like I was in class with you. Right?
Oh,
you were speaking directly to me.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So as we sort of wrap up this discussion, one thing the visitor did do was gives Jake Sisko almost a sense of destiny, something that the Next Generation never really succeeded at with Wesley. Well, they tried to hit you over the head with it with Wesley.
Yeah. Wesley's special. He's special.
Did you hear? He's special? Yeah, I just got an email that says Wesley's special. Beverly, I just got another memo. Yeah. How do you think this episode does in separating Jake from Wesley as, quote, the supporting child character? And who do you find it easier to relate to when thinking back on them both? Rachel, we'll start with you. You have some thoughts on
Well, of course, Jake is easier to relate to because, like, he has like a realistic relationship with his parent, whereas, like, I don't know, like Wesley and Beverly like barely interact.
Fine, Mom.
Yeah, Mom.
I won't go on the bridge of the ship. Fine.
I slapped him.
The last episode I watched is where, like, she's flirting with some guy and he's like, is she just a friend, Mom? And it's like, nobody talks to their mom like that. Like,
Hey, 24th century has evolved.
21st century.
they're not horrified by their mom dating.
I guess not.
I guess not.
It's a biological urge.
So Jake has a realistic relationship. Jake also, like, realistic in the sense that he also, like, he does stuff that his, like, dad doesn't want him to do either. Like, he wants him to join Starfleet, and he's like, I don't really want to do that. And then they, like, still love each other, which is like, and Sisko and his dad have that too, where they're kind of like bickering but in love, which is, very a very realistic thing, because you think you're always annoyed with your family but you still love them.
Right.
But yeah, and also because Jake wasn't joining Starfleet, he's an average or like normal person. Maybe he's like pretty talented writer, but he's not
the chosen one.
Yeah, he's not attracting like interstellar beings to have him become energy or anything like that. So I mean, there isn't. The only thing about Wesley that I would relate to, I guess, is being expected to be good all the time, because I was a lot smarter than a lot of people growing up, and I think that kind of put an expectation on myself that I would always be the smartest. And then I always kind of, as an adult, feel like I'm like not living up to what I like, as being told that, oh, you're really special. You're the best person in the class. Being told that over and over again, like, when you realize you're not actually that special, like, you kind of always feel like you're not very good. Like, as an adult. Yeah. But, like, I don't know, they never explored that with Wesley. It was just always he really was the best. So yeah,
you might get straight A's in school.
What's interesting about Wesley is Wesley was Gene Roddenberry's middle name, so he was clearly like an homage to Gene Roddenberry, and I wonder if, as a result of that, they just didn't know what to do with the character that would be inadvertently perceived as offending Gene Roddenberry or being insulting of him. So that's why they sort of put him up on a pedestal, because to some extent that's what fans have done to Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe they can do, like, if we're gonna pitch shows, they can do Wesley as an adult, where
Ooh, dude, I want that show. I just want it to be him, like, he's got a beer gut and he's just like
he's
watching
still
TV
a
all the
wonderkin,
time.
but he does, like, all of his mediocre classmates are like randomly got rich by like doing the right profession, and so now he's like, oh man, like, I really wasn't successful. Like,
he's captain of a garbage scow.
Yeah. Chris, what do you think?
I mean, Jake is infinitely more relatable, not least of which because I spend an inordinate amount of time writing. So, and I'm sure that, Zaki, you saw some recognizable aspects of wanting, just wanting to punch up that last paragraph before you stick your head up to see exactly what's going on around you. But, I mean, just from the human perspective, like, and I don't know if this is like a common feeling among Star Trek fans, but I always rolled my eyes whenever the Traveler showed up. Every time.
Yeah. Oh, dude, totally.
Every time. And because that, you talked about destiny at the beginning. that's how they kind of tried to shoehorn it in from the start with Wesley, right? Because the travelers saw something in him, and they just utterly failed with that across 7 years. I mean, not as a regular, obviously, but we were aware of Wesley, and he appeared throughout the majority of the show's 7 seasons. So they just totally chose to leave that behind, and then he became, like a protester in the last episode. But then when he turns up at Riker and Troy's wedding, he's in a Starfleet dress uniform again. And I know that there's like whether it was in the novelization or an original script or something, that his clothes were like torn up and he was just borrowing a uniform. It's just like contrived, but it's a very strange journey that Wesley goes on. And Jake's journey isn't strange, but it's very recognizable because of its humanity. So I always prefer, if we're going to go into the pitching territory, why don't we have a show with Wesley, Jake, and Nog, just those 3, and
oh man,
and see what they're up to on the cusp of the 25th century, because that might be a little bit interesting. But yeah, I mean, Jake has always been far more of a relatable character than what. And that's not to say that I dislike Wesley. I don't. But right. if I see aspects of myself in anyone's experience or in anyone's personality, easily that's Jake over Wesley. I was not a prodigy as a child, far from it.
And Wesley was really, in my opinion, he was at his strongest when he that prodiginess is challenged or just discounted. I mean, when I think of like good Wesley episodes, The Game,
First Duty,
yeah, for sure, right? Which is all about, hey, you think you're hot shit.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much. I mean, when Picard dresses him down, that's like you know what I mean? That's like Santa yelling at you. You know what I mean? You're like, oh my God, I feel
it's terrible. One of the defining Picard monologues.
Oh, it's so great. I actually screen that in my classes because I talk about ethos, logos, and pathos, and I define them, and then I screen that, and I say, where's the ethos, where's the logos, where's the pathos, and that always, I keep that alive.
Yeah, excellent.
Nice.
Cicero, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm a Wesley guy. No, of course it's Jake, right? Like, it's and again, like Chris, nothing against Wesley Crusher. And the character was a wild character. The defining moments for me for Wesley Crusher were always The Game. I just felt like that was his moment. But Jake, from aesthetically, if I can be vain for a second, aesthetically, obviously I saw myself in Star Trek with the Siskos. And almost to the exclusion of everything else, almost everywhere else. And the fact that there was, when I was watching the show or when the show was live, my relationship with my father was much better. And my father was he was a very affectionate person. He was really smart. He was someone I admired. But he was, he was hard, but he was still, my representation of what manhood was. And it was one that I could be proud of, at least based on my assumptions and my assertions at the time. It was something that I could be proud of. And I saw that also in Ben Sisko and his relationship with Jake. And then Jake as a human just was more of that, was more 3-dimensional than Wesley Crusher ever was.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the modern Trek shows, I mean, Picard had his surrogate son in Wesley. Jake was obviously Captain Sisko's son, and Captain Archer had his dog Porthos.
Right.
So those are your kids on the show, right. And very different approaches.
Right.
I think Cicero, what you said is very apt. I mean, I think I think for me, the growth of the character over the 7 seasons is what's most when you look at the show in toto, that's what you get to see, is he goes from a child in the pilot to he is a man by the time the show ends. And we've essentially seen the kind of father Captain Sisko was in the kind of man that Jake Sisko has become. And I think that's one of the treasures that this show offers when you view it in its totality.
Right.
Excellent.
And with that, I'm going to hand the center seat back to Chris.
All right. Let me stretch my back here before I sit back in it. Thank you, sir.
The con is yours.
Thank you, sir. Oh, well, that was a good one, guys. I mean, really, Zaki, excellent choice, of course. I mean, I think we've all picked pretty solid episodes. We're not exactly doing hidden gems here. We're doing our favorites. And it's pretty easy to see how that one rises to the top. Even, from the most objective perspective, I think that's clearly one of the best episodes that Star Trek has produced. So very well done, sir.
Right.
A good,
Thank you.
Good episode. I was really happy to watch it again. So before we bring you another one of our panel's favorite episodes, we're going to be devoting our next episode to the first in the series of short treks, really our first look at new material related to Discovery. After that, though, we'll be returning to the past. So, Cicero, your episode is up next. So first, guide us through your thought process before you made your specific choice, and let us know what your choice is.
Well, so my thought process was I think when we initially started talking about this, full disclosure, when we initially started talking about this, I naturally gravitated towards something that I had watched from Discovery because it was fresh in my mind, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happened that we all had picked episodes from the different series within the franchise. And then our good friend Sharif Jackson also wanted to contribute, and his choice was my choice. So then, so I defer to Sharif on his choice. All right. So instead, what I decided to do was pick something from Enterprise instead of Discovery. Nice. And I decided to go with season 2, episode 23, Regeneration.
Interesting choice.
Good choice. Love it.
Yeah.
The Borg.
The Borg.
Oh,
the Borg.
God. Okay. Well, I'll have some opinions.
Oh, no.
Interesting choice. Now, what was it that led you specifically? I mean, obviously, we're going to get into it when the episode rolls around, but what was it that led you there?
So, I thought it was a great episode where we weren't necessarily on a ship. We were able to paint the Borg as something more than one-dimensional. And it gave us a good chance to talk to a lot of the characters in Enterprise. So this felt good to me.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, that's going to be, I can already tell it's going to be a very lively discussion. So, so excellent choice. And, it gives us a little bit of an opportunity as well to examine some things that are going on with Discovery in terms of retconning. So that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our return from quite a long absence. One thing that I did want to share with you before I left you completely, I always say at the end of the show, if you want to write a review, please do on Facebook, on iTunes, whatever it might be, and we will read it at the end of the show. Well, someone reviewed us on Facebook. A listener named Michelle. She says, "This is an awesome look at each episode with real Star Trek nerds at the helm. So happy I found you on Podbean. Love it, and all 4 of you." Michelle, thank you very much. The feeling is mutual. We really appreciate that you've come along with us, and I hope you enjoy what we have in store for the future. So very nice words, always appreciated. But constructive criticism is also welcome as well. We do want to be a continuously evolving show in a positive direction. So, feel free to let constructive criticism come down the pike. But just know that we will rebut you if we think it's necessary. So that's going to do it for episode 27 of Discovery Debrief. We hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please like and follow us on our social media channels. And if you'd be so kind, we'd also appreciate it if you were a review for the show on iTunes or Facebook. It only takes a minute, and we'll be happy to read your review on the air when it's posted, as I just did. If you have any questions, you can follow the show on Twitter at DSC Debrief, where you can also find all of our individual Twitter handles. And feel free to send us questions through Twitter, our Facebook like page, or by emailing us at hailingfrequencies@discoverydebrief.com. Please be sure to set your courses for this feed for future episodes, and be sure to join us as we convene next time to discuss the first episode of Short Treks as we continue the journey towards Season 2 of Discovery in January. As always, though, until we meet again, please go boldly, my friends.